It was supposed to be a quiet Friday evening. I was in the kitchen, slicing apples for a little fruit platter. Marley had invited a few of her friends over, girls I had known since they were in high school, girls who used to come to me for snacks and advice and hugs. Back then, they called me Mama J. I always liked that. It made me feel needed, important, seen. The living room buzzed with laughter and music. It wasn't loud, but I could hear them giggling over something one of them said. My hip ached. It had been bothering me again all week. But I pushed through the pain because that's what mothers do. I arranged the fruit neatly, poured some sparkling lemonade into mismatched glasses, and carried the tray into the living room with a smile. The moment I stepped in, the laughter died. Not completely, but just enough for me to notice the way it dipped. The girls smiled politely except for Marley, who looked almost annoyed. "Thanks, Mom," she said flatly. She didn't reach for the tray. I stood there awkwardly, holding the platter like a waitress waiting for a table to decide. Then one of her friends, Lena, gave a soft laugh and asked, "Is she always like this?" Marley rolled her eyes and, without even glancing my way, said, "She's just always around." I swear, it's like living with a burden. The room went quiet, a weird, uncomfortable quiet. But then someone laughed, nervous and shallow, and it was like a switch flipped. The others followed, not cruelly, not with malice, just carelessly. Like I wasn't there. Like I hadn't just heard my only daughter call me a burden. I smiled, or I tried to. My lips did that thing they do when I don't want to cry in public. They stretched tight, almost convincingly. I set the tray down on the coffee table and muttered, "Enjoy," before turning back toward the kitchen. The apples trembled on the plate. My hands had started shaking. I stood over the sink and stared out the window, pretending to watch the wind push the neighbor's tree. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for the laughter to resume behind me. Long enough for my face to stop burning. I should have said something. Maybe called her out. Maybe demanded an apology. But I didn't. That's the thing about being a mother. You carry so much that when someone calls you heavy, you start believing them. I wondered when exactly I had stopped being a person and started being a problem. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. I kept replaying the moment in my mind over and over, as if I could find some excuse, some better explanation. Maybe she was trying to be funny. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I remembered the way she didn't even flinch when she said it. The way she looked right through me, like I was invisible. Like I wasn't the woman who sat beside her through chicken pox and heartbreaks, who worked double shifts to pay for her braces, who sold her own jewelry to cover her first semester tuition when the scholarship didn't come through. I had become a ghost in my own daughter's house. And yet, strangely, there was a calm in that realization, a stillness, like the air just before a storm when everything is too quiet and you know something is about to change. At exactly 5:12 a.m., I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and whispered out loud, "No more." I moved slowly, but with purpose. I folded my clothes neatly into my old leather suitcase. I packed my sketchbook, my medications, a few family photos, and the lockbox I kept hidden in the back of Marley's closet. I slipped a note under her bedroom door. Short, simple. "Thank you for everything. I won't be a burden anymore." As I closed the front door behind me and stepped into the morning chill, the silence felt different. This time, it wasn't lonely. It was freeing. And in that exact moment, I knew my story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Before things changed, before the silence, the tension, and that awful word, I honestly believed Marley and I were still a team. I'm Janessa Whitlow. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I've been a mother before anything else. My husband Frank passed away 8 years ago after a sudden heart attack while out tending the backyard. He was strong, proud, and always smiling. And when he was gone, Marley and I clung to each other to survive the loss. At the time, she was just entering college, young, bright, and full of dreams. I worked 2 jobs to make sure she didn't have to take on a single loan. I'd saved every penny Frank left behind and added to it year by year. It wasn't easy, but it felt like a purpose. She was my reason. Even when I was tired, I showed up for every parent's weekend, brought care packages during finals, and video called her every Sunday evening just to see her face and remind her that no matter how hard the world became, she had someone rooting for her. After college, Marley moved back home briefly before getting her first job in the city. Eventually, she got her own apartment, small but neat, and we still talked almost every other day. Birthdays, holidays, hard Mondays. I was always there, and she always said she appreciated it. Then came the fall I fractured my hip. I slipped outside my garden, just a little misstep, and ended up with a surgery, metal screws, and months of slow, painful recovery. When Marley came to the hospital, she squeezed my hand and said, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll get through this together. You can come stay with me while you heal." I cried. Not from the pain, but from gratitude. It felt like the years of raising her with love had circled back. It felt like we were full circle, mother and daughter, now woman to woman, supporting each other. So I moved in with her. She cleared out her second bedroom, set up a reading nook by the window, and even bought my favorite herbal teas. For the first few weeks, we laughed while watching old sitcoms, went grocery shopping together, and chatted during morning coffee. There was a comfort in it, a closeness that reminded me of her teenage years when she'd come to my room late at night to talk about crushes or bad dreams. I cooked for her most days since she worked long hours. I tidied the place, folded her laundry, and tried not to be in the way. I stayed quiet when she took meetings, made sure her friends felt welcome when they visited, and kept my needs minimal. She never asked me for money, but I contributed where I could. I didn't want to be a guest. I wanted to be helpful. And for a while, it worked. We went out for brunch some Sundays. She let me help pick out a new sofa. She even brought me flowers once when I was feeling down about not being fully mobile yet. "You've always taken care of me," she said. "Let me take care of you now." I held on to that sentence like a prayer. I replayed it in my mind during long, painful nights when my hip throbbed and sleep refused to come. I believed her. I truly did. Looking back, I think I clung so hard to that feeling because deep down, I already sensed it slipping. Little things started changing. Fewer shared meals, more closed doors, less laughter. But I brushed it aside. I thought maybe she was just stressed with work. Or maybe she needed space and didn't know how to ask. I never once thought she resented me. Because how could she? I was the mother who gave up nights and weekends, friends and vacations, birthdays and bonuses, just to be there for her. I was the one who remembered every childhood detail, who held her when she had the flu, who made her believe in herself when her confidence cracked. I wasn't perfect, but I never gave her anything less than all of me. So I held on to the memory of that initial warmth, the movie nights, the shared coffee, the giggling over cheesy takeout menus. I convinced myself we were still close, that she still saw me as her mother, her ally, her home. But I was wrong. She had begun seeing me as something else. Not a blessing, not a partner in healing, but a shadow she couldn't shake, a burden. And I wouldn't fully understand just how far we had drifted until the day she said it out loud. It happened during one of those in-between moments, quiet, forgettable, easy to brush off if I'd wanted to, and I did want to. At the time, I practically begged myself to let it go. But now, when I look back, I realize that was the moment the light started to flicker. Marley was sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone while I was preparing dinner. I had made her favorite: baked salmon with lemon garlic butter, roasted sweet potatoes, and asparagus with parmesan. The kind of meal that took planning, timing, and love. Cooking gave me a sense of purpose again. It made me feel like I still had something to give. She was texting someone, smiling, faintly, half laughing. I stirred the pan and asked, "Who's got you smiling like that?" Without looking up, she said, "Oh, Lena." She wants me to go to Palm Springs with her in April. Girls' trip. I smiled. That sounds fun. You should go. Marley let out a sharp breath that was halfway between a laugh and a groan. Yeah, I wish. I can't exactly take a vacation when I'm playing nurse at home. My hand stopped mid-stir. I turned slowly toward her, thinking maybe I'd misheard. What did you say? She didn't look up from her phone. Nothing. Just kidding. Just kidding. Those two words are a trapdoor for cruelty. They slam shut before you can protest, leaving you wondering if maybe you're the problem for taking things too seriously. I stood there for a moment, letting the words wrap around my chest like a tightening string. Then I smiled, forced, but she didn't notice, and said, "Well, I'll try not to hold you back too much." That finally got her attention. She glanced up, blinked, then said, "I didn't mean it, Mom." Relax. Relax. That word stung more than it should have, like I was being sensitive for wanting to be treated like a person, not a burden. I turned back to the stove, but something in the room had changed. The warmth had cooled. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny crack had just formed in the floor beneath us. That night, I barely touched my food. Marley was on her phone the entire dinner, occasionally showing me photos from Lena's Instagram. I nodded, pretended to listen. But inside, I was shrinking. Over the next few days, little things started standing out more than they used to. She sighed louder when I asked questions. She spoke faster, like she didn't have time to talk. She started putting in headphones during dinner. Once she left a note on the fridge that said, "Don't wait up, going to Lena's. No love you. No see you tomorrow." I told myself not to read into it. She's just stressed, tired, busy. But something kept gnawing at the edges of my mind. One afternoon while she was at work, I opened the hall closet to get a new light bulb. As I moved some boxes, I found a little notebook she used to write in as a teenager. I smiled, remembering the poems and doodles and dramatic entries about high school crushes. I flipped through it, curious if she'd written anything recent. Tucked in the back was a page with a list titled, "What I Need to Fix to Breathe Again." Number 1, get my own space back. Number 3, stop feeling guilty about wanting my mom gone. Number 7, find a way to talk to her without hurting her. My hands went cold. I didn't even realize I was crying until I saw the drops on the page. I closed the book and put it exactly where I found it. I never told her I saw it. I told myself I had no right. It wasn't meant for me, but it was about me. That night, she came home and asked why I hadn't made dinner. I lied and said I wasn't feeling well. She didn't ask any more questions. That's when I understood. The person I had sacrificed for, the girl I had loved so fiercely, had started to see me not as a mother, but as a weight she was trying to set down. It wasn't hate. It wasn't cruelty. It was indifference. And in many ways, that hurt worse. Because hate is at least loud. Indifference is silent, and it stays. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from death, but from being slowly erased by someone you love. That was what I lived with every day in that apartment. Not shouting, not slammed doors, just silence, withdrawal, the steady removal of warmth. You don't notice it all at once. It comes like winter creeping through the walls. By the time you realize how cold it is, you're already shivering. I remember a morning not long after I found Marley's list. I had gotten up early as usual and made scrambled eggs with spinach and toast. It used to be her favorite when she was little. She'd sit on the counter while I cooked and say, "You make it better than any diner, Mama." I had hoped the smell might remind her of those mornings, maybe spark something. She walked into the kitchen, glanced at the plate on the table, and sighed. "Ugh, eggs again?" she muttered. "You know I don't have time for sit-down breakfasts." I looked up from my cup of tea. "You can take it to go, honey. I wrapped it in foil." She didn't even answer, just grabbed her iced coffee from the fridge and walked out the door. No, thank you. No, have a good day. Just keys jingling, the sound of heels on tile, and the door closing behind her like a period at the end of a sentence. That was how it went day after day, little acts of erasure. I stopped being spoken to and became someone she spoke around. She'd have phone conversations in the room while I was sitting right there, as if I was a piece of furniture. She started using headphones at dinner, watching videos while I sat across from her eating quietly. And when her friends came over, I was expected to stay out of sight, no invitation to join, no mention of me at all. One evening, I tried to connect. She had come home late, clearly upset. Her face was red, her shoulders tense, and she dropped her purse on the floor instead of the hook by the door. I asked softly, "Tough day?" She gave a tight nod and went to the fridge. When she realized we were out of her favorite oat milk, she turned and snapped, "Can you please make a list before you finish stuff I buy?" I was stunned. Not by the tone, I'd heard that creeping in already, but by the fact that she believed I owed her an explanation for drinking milk. I paid for half the groceries. I cleaned, cooked, made the bed in the guest room, did the laundry, and yet here she was, scolding me like I was a teenager crashing on her couch rent-free. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'll grab more tomorrow." She didn't even look at me when she replied, "Whatever. Whatever." Another word that sticks in your skin and festers. After that night, I started retreating. I only left my room when necessary. I ate after she did. I showered early in the morning so I wouldn't get in her way. I began counting how many words she said to me in a day, and they rarely crossed 10. And still, I made excuses for her. She's just stressed. She's still growing. She doesn't mean it. I said these things over and over until I could barely believe them myself. And yet, it was easier to keep telling myself lies than to face the one truth I didn't want to name. She didn't want me there anymore. The worst part was the way my body started to reflect what I was feeling. My back ached more. I forgot where I left things. I didn't laugh anymore. I stopped reading, even though I used to love it. My once colorful world had turned gray. I wasn't living. I was waiting for something to change or for someone to remember I existed. I stopped calling my friends. What would I even say? That my only daughter seemed to hate the sight of me? That I felt like an unpaid maid in a house I helped build? I was too ashamed, too proud, too afraid to hear my own thoughts out loud. Once I overheard Marley on the phone with Lena again. "She's just always here," she said with a tired kind of irritation. "I feel suffocated. I can't breathe." And that's when it hit me. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being resented. The girl who once held my hand crossing the street now avoided my gaze. The child who cried for me during thunderstorms now rolled her eyes when I spoke. The daughter who used to say, "You're my whole world, Mom," now saw me as a burden she couldn't shake off. That's when something inside me began to shift. It didn't roar, it didn't rage, it just settled. A quiet knowing that this life, this silence, this shrinking version of myself couldn't be the end of my story. Not yet. It was a Friday evening, the kind that used to mean popcorn, a movie, and laughter on the couch. But those nights were long gone. Marley had invited her friends over, something she rarely did while I was in the apartment. I took that as a good sign. Maybe things were warming up again. Maybe I'd finally done something right. I remember even brushing my hair a little nicer that day, putting on a sweater that didn't look too old, just in case I ended up saying hello. I made chocolate chip cookies from scratch, just like I used to when Marley was little and had sleepovers. She'd beg for one before they were cooled, and I'd pretend to say no. It was our thing. Those cookies felt like the last piece of me I still knew how to give. The moment her friends walked in, I realized I'd misread everything. They were all dressed casually, laughing loudly, dropping their shoes by the door like they owned the place. Marley barely looked my way. I greeted them, softly, but no one really acknowledged me. They just headed straight to the living room, tossing their bags on the couch like I didn't exist. Still, I brought in the cookies and placed them on the coffee table. I made a fresh batch, I said, still warm. One of the girls, Sierra, I think, looked down, raised an eyebrow, and mumbled, "Oh, thanks." Then came the moment. The one I wish I could erase, or at least stop replaying every night before I fall asleep. They were talking about some new guy from work. I wasn't really listening, just tidying up the kitchen nearby. Then I heard Marley say it, loud enough for me to hear, loud enough for me to feel it. She just lingers, like a shadow. It's like having this old ghost follow you around everywhere. I swear, I feel like I can't even breathe in my own place. A pause, then laughter. The girls thought it was a joke, but I knew better, because I was the shadow, the ghost. I stood still, completely still. My hands gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. My heart didn't break. It cracked, slow and steady, like ice under weight. Marley didn't look toward me. She didn't apologize, didn't glance nervously to see if I'd heard, because in her mind, I wasn't in the room, I wasn't in the house, I wasn't anything. I wanted to disappear, but you can't disappear when you've already been erased. I left the cookies where they were and walked down the hallway to my room. Closed the door softly, sat on the edge of the bed with my back straight, my hands folded in my lap like a child being punished. I didn't cry, not then. My body wouldn't allow it. There was something worse than tears, something heavier. I just sat there, staring at the floor, listening to the muffled laughter coming from the living room. The girls stayed for hours, talking, eating the cookies I had made, sharing stories and playlists like I didn't live just one room away. At some point, I heard someone say, "You're so patient, Marley. I could never live with my mom." Marley laughed. "It's not forever." That one hit the hardest, not because of what it meant, but because of how easily she said it, like she had an exit strategy, like I was a temporary inconvenience. It wasn't until the house fell quiet and the girls had finally left that I allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, not in gasps, just silent tears that soaked the collar of my sweater. I didn't want her to hear. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she had wounded me. It wasn't pride, it was survival. I looked at the small framed photo beside my bed. Marley at age 6, smiling wide with a gap in her teeth, frosting on her nose from a birthday cupcake. I remember that day so vividly. I'd made everything from scratch. She ran into my arms and told me I was the best mom in the world. Now I was her shame. And for the first time in my life, I started asking myself a question I never thought I'd consider. What happens when the person you built your life around no longer wants you in it? And worse, what happens when you still love them anyway? The night after Marley humiliated me in front of her friends, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling until the room grew gray with morning light. My pillow was still damp, though I hadn't cried in hours. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. Anger would have required more energy than I had left. What I felt was something quieter, something deeper, a dull ache in my chest that pulsed like a warning. I didn't belong here anymore. I had overstayed my welcome. That phrase, overstayed my welcome, repeated in my mind like a sad little tune. It felt familiar. It felt true. And yet, I'd never imagined I could feel that way in my own daughter's home. A home I helped pay for. A home I filled with groceries, clean laundry, home-cooked meals, and late-night worry. But none of that mattered anymore, because she didn't see me. Not as her mother, not as a person, not even as a guest. I moved slowly, carefully. I didn't want the floorboards to creak. I didn't want to explain anything. I didn't want to hear her voice. Not another apology that wasn't really one. Not another "relax, Mom," like my heartbreak was some silly overreaction. I reached for my suitcase, tucked neatly under the bed. It had dust on the handles. I hadn't touched it since moving in, hopeful that I wouldn't need it again anytime soon. I packed with the kind of precision that comes when you've planned your exit in your mind long before your hands begin the work. I folded 2 pairs of slacks, 3 cardigans, my reading glasses, my favorite sweater with the tiny embroidered roses Frank bought me our last Christmas together. I packed my toothbrush, my arthritis medication, the tiny lavender sachets I kept in my drawers, and finally, I reached into Marley's hall closet, where I kept the lockbox. I had hidden it there on purpose, away from my things, almost as if I was afraid she might find it and question it. The truth was, she never would have noticed. She never looked that closely anymore. The lockbox was small, metal, and a little scuffed. It had once belonged to Frank. Inside it was every financial decision I'd quietly made over the last decade. The life insurance payout, savings, receipts, the documents proving the college fund was in my name, not Marley's. A technicality she never thought to ask about. She had simply assumed it was hers. I took one last walk through the apartment. My eyes lingered on the bookshelf I had helped her arrange, the succulents I watered when she forgot, the throw blanket I had crocheted last winter during my recovery. Each item whispered, "You tried." But love alone isn't always enough, especially when one person stops showing up. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Plain, neat, deliberate. "Marley, thank you for letting me stay as long as you did. I know I've become more of a weight than a help. You deserve your space, and I deserve mine. Take care of yourself. Mom." No guilt, no anger, just truth. At 6:14 a.m., I closed the front door behind me. It clicked softly the way you might close a nursery door after putting a baby to sleep. Quiet, final. The world outside was still. Pale orange light stretched across the sky, just beginning to push back the night. The street smelled like dew and pavement. I stood there for a moment on the steps, unsure where to go, but completely sure I couldn't go back. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post a sad status or send a crying emoji to an old friend. I just walked, dragging my little suitcase behind me. Every step felt like a goodbye, but also like a beginning. I didn't know where I'd sleep that night or what my next move would be, but for the first time in a long time, I was no longer living in someone else's silence. I was choosing my own. At the bus stop, I sat beside a young woman eating a breakfast sandwich. She offered me half. I declined politely, but thanked her. It was the first kindness I'd felt in weeks. As the bus pulled up, I climbed aboard with no plan. Just a lockbox in my bag and a determination in my chest. I didn't have a destination, but I had a choice, and I had finally made it. The bus ride out of town felt like floating underwater. Everything was muffled. The hum of the tires, the dull chatter of passengers, the ding of the stop bell. I sat near the back with my suitcase balanced between my feet, clutching the lockbox like a lifeline. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. By mid-afternoon, I checked into a roadside motel in a town I barely recognized. It was the kind of place where the air smelled faintly of bleach. The walls were thin, and the front desk clerk barely looked up when I slid my ID across the counter. The room was small. 2 twin beds, a faded floral bedspread, a cracked lampshade, and a chair that wobbled if you sat in it too fast. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the brown curtain that covered a view of a dumpster and a half-empty parking lot. I don't know how long I sat there. The silence was thick. It didn't comfort me. It didn't soothe me. It pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shake. My hands trembled, and for the first time in years, I felt truly, utterly alone. Not the kind of alone you feel when someone is just in another room. The kind of alone where you wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. I tried to eat, but the vending machine chips tasted like cardboard. I tried to read, but the letters blurred. Eventually, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, a thin strip of glass above a cracked sink, and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were puffy, her mouth downturned with lines deeper than she remembered having. Her hair, once thick and dark, now hung limp and gray. There was something hollow in her face, like a light had been snuffed out. That's when it really hit me. I didn't just lose a home. I had lost the version of myself I spent decades building. I thought of Frank, of how he used to stroke my cheek and call me his lion heart. He said I had a fire in me, even when I didn't see it. He believed I could do anything. And now, here I was, a widow sitting in a cheap motel room with a daughter who saw me as disposable. I curled into bed fully clothed and pulled the covers over my head. Not to sleep. I didn't want to sleep. I just didn't want to be seen, not by the world, not even by myself. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Marley's face as a child, the dimpled grin, the way she'd run to me when she was scared. But even those memories felt far away, like scenes from a movie I once watched and had long since forgotten. Sometime around midnight, the heat kicked in with a wheeze and a clang, jolting me out of a daze. My back ached, my hip throbbed, and my heart felt like a balloon someone had let go of, deflated, drifting. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I prayed, not with words, not to ask for anything, just a whisper in my mind, please, let this not be the end of me. I wasn't praying to be rescued. I was praying to be reminded that I still existed, that I still mattered. I woke up the next morning with crusty eyes and a back sore from the hard mattress. But I also woke up with the tiniest flicker of resolve. I was still breathing. I still had 2 feet, and tucked in my bag was a lockbox filled with choices. Money, records, proof that I hadn't given everything away. The motel room still felt like a holding cell, but now it also felt like a waiting room. Like something might come next, even if I didn't know what that was yet. I made a cup of instant coffee, sat by the window, and watched a stray cat leap from the dumpster to the sidewalk. It moved with confidence, like it didn't care who saw it dig for scraps. And somehow, that little cat made me smile. I didn't know it yet, but I had just hit rock bottom, and I was still here. The morning after that long, restless night, I sat on the motel bed with a chipped mug of coffee in my hands. The weak brew burned slightly going down, but I welcomed the discomfort. It was the only thing that made me feel awake. Outside, the world was still waking up. Trucks rumbling down the nearby highway, a woman in scrubs walking quickly toward the bus stop, and that same orange stray cat leaping from one trash bin to another like it owned the place. I sat with the lockbox on my lap. I hadn't opened it yet, not since I left Marley's apartment. I'd carried it like a shield, something to hold on to when the world didn't feel safe, but I hadn't looked inside. Now, with nowhere else to go and nothing else to distract me, I flipped the latch. Inside were the essentials: account ledgers, statements, my will, a few photos of Frank and Marley, her baby teeth smile, the 2 of us holding her up between us on the beach, Frank with sunscreen smeared across his nose and laughter in his eyes. And then I saw it, folded neatly in the back, pressed between the insurance papers and a birth certificate. An envelope, my name written in blue ink, Janessa, Frank's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled it out gently, as if it might tear just from being touched. I hadn't seen that letter in years. I remembered him giving it to me just weeks after Marley was born. If anything ever happens to me, he had said, I want you to have this. Not right away, someday. I had stored it in the lockbox intending to read it when I really needed to. Apparently, someday had finally come. I unfolded the paper, yellowed at the edges, and began to read. My Janessa. If you're reading this, I guess life has taken a turn. I hope it's not because I'm gone, but if I am, well, then I guess I'm still here in the only way I can be. I want to say first, I've never known a woman braver than you. The way you love, the way you give, the way you protect people even when you're exhausted, that's your superpower. I know you'll always put Marley first. That's who you are. But don't forget to leave something for yourself. Don't disappear in the name of motherhood. Don't let anyone make you feel like too much or not enough. Promise me that, okay? Someday Marley will grow up. She'll make her own choices, and you'll be tempted to carry her through all of it. But she'll need to learn who she is without leaning on your strength. And you'll need to remember that you are more than someone's mother. You are Janessa. Don't forget her. I love you. Always. Frank, I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. Tears fell, not in gasps or sobs, but in steady, quiet streams that soaked through my shirt. I had forgotten. I had forgotten who I was outside of being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's support system. I had spent so many years trying to make everyone else's lives easier, I didn't even know how to exist for myself anymore. But Frank had remembered. He had seen me. Not just the sacrifices, not just the strength, but me. The woman who loved art, who made her own decisions, who laughed too loudly at her own jokes. The woman who once dreamed of opening a little gallery full of handmade crafts and paintings, even if no one ever came. I looked around the motel room at the peeling paint and buzzing light bulb, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a place to pause, a place to think, a place to rediscover. I reread that line. Don't let anyone make you feel like too much or not enough. That's exactly what Marley had done, what I had let her do. She had taken my silence as permission, my presence as obligation, my love as something cheap and expected. But I wasn't a burden. I was a woman who had carried an entire world on her shoulders. And now, for the first time, I was going to carry myself. I placed the letter back in the envelope and tucked it into my purse, close, where I could reach it when I needed reminding. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew now I had a reason to make one. Frank had given me more than love. He'd given me permission to matter again. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The motel room still smelled like cheap cleaner and stale carpet, but something had shifted in the air, or maybe just inside me. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't feel like I was dragging myself through another day. I sat up slowly, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and poured myself a cup of instant coffee. The water from the motel kettle tasted like metal, but I didn't care. I opened the window just an inch, letting in the crisp morning air and the sound of birds singing somewhere beyond the parking lot. I reread Frank's letter, twice, and by the end of it, I felt something stirring inside my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Something older than that, something steadier, clarity. Frank had reminded me of something that had long been buried under years of caretaking and sacrifice. I used to dream. I used to have a life that belonged to me, before the schedules and school pickups and PTA meetings, before grief hollowed me out, before Marley became the center of my universe. Once I wanted to be an artist, not a famous one, not a gallery darling, just a woman with a paintbrush and something to say. I used to sketch while Marley napped in her crib. I'd paint tiny canvases in the garage while Frank played with her in the yard. I loved how colors let me feel things I couldn't say out loud. It wasn't just a hobby. It was how I breathed. And I had let it disappear. I opened my bag and found my old sketch pad at the bottom, tucked between sweaters and a pair of socks. The pages were dusty. Some of the corners were bent. But it was still mine. I flipped to a blank page, picked up the cheap motel pen from the bedside table, and began to draw. At first it was just lines. Scribbles, nonsense. But then the lines turned into shapes, and the shapes became a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, hair blowing in the wind, face turned toward the horizon. She didn't look like me. Not exactly. But I knew she was me. I drew until my hand ached and the sun was fully up. Later that morning, I walked into the nearest diner, a place called Evelyn's Kitchen, full of chipped booths and the smell of bacon and burnt toast. The waitress called me Han and poured my coffee before I asked. I ordered eggs and toast and sat by the window with my sketchbook open, letting the world happen around me. Across from the diner was a bulletin board covered in local notices: garage sales, piano lessons, lost dogs, and one that caught my eye: community art studio, beginner classes, all ages welcome, sliding scale. My heart skipped. I tore the little tag off the bottom with the phone number and tucked it into my pocket like a secret. Back at the motel, I called. A woman named Trina answered. She sounded cheerful, but not fake. "We've got a drop-in session tomorrow afternoon," she said. "Nothing formal, just bring whatever you've got and come say hi." I hung up, then stared at the wall for a full minute, unsure whether to cry or laugh. It felt like the first step toward something. I didn't know what. I didn't even know if I had the nerve to walk through the door when the time came. But I had taken a step. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had stopped waiting for someone else to rescue me from it. Marley wasn't going to apologize the right way. She wasn't going to wake up and suddenly value me the way I deserved. And that realization didn't break me. It freed me. Because if her approval wasn't coming, I didn't have to wait for it anymore. I didn't have to be the ghost in someone else's house. I could build a home within myself. One sketch, one choice, one quiet morning at a time. I didn't make any grand declarations. No sweeping posts on social media, no dramatic phone calls, no long letters to Marley. What I did instead was quiet, steady, and completely mine. The world didn't see me changing, but I felt it. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to what life threw at me. I was building something on purpose. The next day, I returned to Evelyn's kitchen with my sketchbook and a heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I sat in the same booth, ordered the same meal, and watched that community bulletin board like it might disappear. The tag from the art studio was still missing. My missing tag. I was going. I had decided, but I was still afraid. Not of the people, not of the class, but of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, again. But I made myself go. The studio was in a strip mall next to a laundromat. It didn't look like much, just a glass door with peeling letters that read, "The Blue Table Studio." Inside, there were long wooden tables, stools with paint splatters, and shelves packed with old brushes, tubes of acrylic, sketch pads, and ceramic mugs full of markers that barely capped properly. There were about 8 people already there, all ages, some teenagers, a man who looked even older than me, scribbling intently, a young mom with her toddler scribbling beside her. The air smelled like turpentine and lavender. Trina, the woman I had spoken to, greeted me with a warm smile. "Janessa," she asked, "we're so glad you came." She didn't ask what brought me there. She didn't push for a story. She just handed me a tray of brushes and motioned to a seat near the window. It was the first time in a long while I felt welcome, without having to prove my worth. I started painting. Just simple strokes at first, then colors, then shapes. I didn't know what it was meant to become. It didn't matter. My hands moved, my breath slowed, my shoulders dropped. That was the moment I realized healing doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a woman alone with a paintbrush in her hand, remembering she's allowed to create. When I got back to the motel, I opened my lockbox again. This time, not for comfort, but for clarity. I made a list, a real one, not a grocery list, not a list of chores, a list of my plans. Attend weekly painting sessions at Blue Table Studio. Look for low-income housing options nearby. Open a separate checking account, my name only. Apply for part-time work at the town library. Contact a lawyer to confirm ownership of Marley's college fund. Get a health checkup. Call Sandra from the book club. I missed her. Revisit old recipes and maybe start a small cooking blog. Finish one full painting. Frame it. Stop apologizing for taking up space. That list became my roadmap. Every small step felt like taking back a part of myself. I didn't tell Marley. I didn't even tell Sandra when I finally called her 2 days later. I didn't need applause or pity. What I needed was momentum. The next morning, I walked to the local library and asked if they were hiring. The woman behind the counter, a petite blonde with horn-rimmed glasses, looked surprised. "We actually need someone to help with weekend shelving and afternoon reading sessions," she said. "You have any experience with books?" I laughed softly. "You're looking at the woman who read Little House on the Prairie out loud, chapter by chapter, every night for 5 years straight." She smiled. "That's good enough for me. Let's get you an application." By the end of the week, I had a schedule. Studio on Tuesdays and Thursdays, library on Saturdays, walks in the park on Sunday mornings, and every night I'd paint. Just a little. Even if it was only a few strokes. No one knew what I was building. But I knew. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was rescuing myself. And I didn't need Marley to see it, because I had finally remembered what Frank always told me. You don't have to make noise to be powerful. You just have to keep going. It started with a voicemail. I was coming back from the library, a small bag of used books in one hand and a fresh coffee in the other, when I noticed the missed call. Marley. My chest tightened for a moment, not from fear or guilt, but something more detached. A memory, maybe. A reminder of what she once meant to me before everything crumbled under her carelessness. I waited until I got back to the motel room to listen. "Mom? I don't know where you are. I woke up and you were just gone. Did you take the college fund? I'm not mad. Please call me." I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I had nothing left to explain. My silence wasn't spite. It was peace. After years of justifying my presence, defending my love, and walking on eggshells in my own daughter's life, I had finally stopped needing her to see me. I saw myself now. That was enough. But the calls kept coming. Each day, a new message. The first few were clipped and tense. If this is some kind of stunt to prove a point, it's not funny. "Seriously, Mom, what are you even thinking? You can't just vanish." Then came confusion, worry, almost desperation. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to say what I said in front of my friends. I was just tired. Please, just tell me you're safe." It was strange. For so long, I had longed for her attention, for her to notice my absence even when I was right in front of her. Now that I was truly gone, she didn't know how to make sense of the silence I had left behind, because silence, when chosen, is powerful. She hadn't expected me to leave. She had counted on my predictability, my loyalty, my love, my habit of forgiving without confrontation. But this time, I hadn't made a scene. I hadn't slammed any doors. I hadn't begged her to treat me better. I had simply vanished from her world and taken something precious with me. I remember standing by the motel window one morning, holding a paintbrush still wet with yellow, watching the sunlight stream through the dust-streaked glass. I was working on a new piece, a simple image of a woman in profile, her hair made of leaves and sky. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Marley. I didn't even flinch. I had stopped living for her reactions. And that's when I realized the power had shifted. Not because I had done anything cruel, but because I had chosen myself. And that choice disrupted the narrative Marley had built, the one where I was always there, always available, always forgiving. Now she was uncertain, off balance. She didn't know how to control a mother who no longer feared losing her approval. At the art studio that afternoon, Trina leaned over my shoulder and said, "There's something new in your strokes. More confidence." I smiled without answering, because I felt it too. I no longer second-guessed my color choices. I wasn't afraid of empty space on the canvas, and that ease was seeping into the rest of my life. At the library, the children had started calling me Miss Jan and asking for their favorite books by name. One of them handed me a crayon drawing of a woman reading, her hair curly like mine with the words, "You're like a book hero," scribbled underneath. I nearly cried right there behind the desk. I walked through town now with my head held higher. I didn't worry who might see me. I didn't feel the need to explain where I came from or who I used to be. I was building a life brick by brick with soft things, books, art, community, and strong things, boundaries, intention, and self-respect. Marley had spent years pulling away, believing I'd never leave. And now, without a word, I had done the one thing she never expected. I made a life without her. And though she didn't say it directly, I could hear it in the tone of her voicemails, in the pauses between her words, in the messages she sent late at night that simply said, "I miss you." But this time, I didn't rush to comfort her, because I had finally learned. Her missing me didn't mean I owed her my presence. It was a Thursday when Marley finally found me. I had just finished my shift at the library, still wearing my name tag and the navy cardigan that smelled faintly of books and floor polish. I'd started walking home, well, back to the motel I was still calling home for now, when I saw her across the street. She was leaning against a light post, arms crossed, her hair pinned up the way she wore it when she was nervous. She spotted me before I could turn back. Her mouth opened slightly, but for a second, she didn't say a word. We stood there for a long moment, the town breathing around us, cars humming by, a dog barking in the distance, the faint clink of cutlery from the cafe behind her. Then she stepped off the curb. "Mom," she said quietly, like the word had finally softened. I didn't run to her. I didn't fall into her arms like some storybook ending. I just nodded. Marley. Her eyes scanned me. My face, my hands, the tote bag slung over my shoulder. She seemed surprised by how steady I looked. Maybe she had expected to find me broken, angry, begging to come home. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "I've been calling you," she said, stepping closer. "You didn't answer." I shrugged. I didn't know what I'd say. She looked down, embarrassed. "You just left." "I had to," I said. "You made it clear I wasn't wanted." "That's not true," she said too quickly, then quieter. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" I asked, not accusing, just honest. She hesitated. "I was overwhelmed and selfish, and I took things out on you that I had no right to. I guess I didn't realize how far it had gone." I didn't reply right away. I wanted her to sit in that discomfort, to let her own words echo in her ears the way hers had echoed in mine for weeks. She took a breath. "I thought you'd come back. Eventually. You always do." That was the line. That's the moment I understood exactly what I had taught her. By accident. I had taught her that love meant endurance, that my forgiveness had no limits, that she could say cruel things, and I would stay. "I'm not coming back," I said. Her mouth parted in disbelief. "But what about your room, your things? What about me?" I looked her square in the eye. "What about me, Marley?" She blinked. "I just meant, this was supposed to be temporary. You said so." "I did, and it was, but you made it permanent when you decided I wasn't a person anymore, just a responsibility you resented." She fell silent. I continued. "I know about the college fund. I know you were counting on it." Her face flushed. Mom, it was never yours, Marley. Your father left that money in my name for a reason. He trusted me to decide how to use it, and for 18 years, I saved it. For you. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as someone who gave, and started seeing me as someone who took up space." She dropped her gaze, ashamed. I softened just a little. "I'm not using the money out of revenge. I'm using it to live, to build something of my own. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you because you needed to hear it from me." Her voice broke when she spoke again. "I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted." "But you did." She nodded slowly. Her eyes welled with tears. "So what happens now?" I looked up at the sky. The sunset was just beginning, pink and gold spilling into the edges of blue. "What happens now is I keep living, I said. And you do too, and maybe someday we find each other again, not out of obligation, but because we both want to, on equal ground. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I'd like that. I nodded. Me too. We stood there a moment longer, two women with the same eyes and the same history, finally seeing each other clearly. Then I turned to walk away. I didn't need to hear her call after me, because I had already said everything that mattered. And this time, I was walking away whole. It had been 3 weeks since I saw Marley on that street corner. We hadn't spoken since. No calls, no messages, just the silence between us. This time, mutual. But it wasn't a silence filled with anger or punishment. It was distance, necessary, healing space. I was still living at the motel, but something inside me had shifted permanently. The fear that once wrapped around my ribs like a belt had loosened. I had options now, plans. My name was officially on the lease of a small one-bedroom apartment above a flower shop in town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The twist, though, the part I didn't see coming, came in a plain white envelope delivered to the motel front desk. It was from my lawyer. Inside was a copy of the trust Frank had created all those years ago. The same trust that had protected the college fund. The same trust I had always believed was meant solely for Marley's education. What I hadn't realized, what Frank had never mentioned, is that he'd added an amendment just 2 months before he died. One line stood out. In the event that our daughter Marley exhibits conduct that compromises the emotional, physical, or financial well-being of Janessa, the beneficiary rights of the education fund are to remain at Janessa's sole discretion, with no obligation or penalty. I read it 3 times. Frank had seen something I hadn't. He knew how much I loved Marley, how completely I would sacrifice for her. But he also knew I had a tendency to give too much, to let love blur my own needs, and he'd written into his will a safety net, a final act of love. The fund wasn't just about college, it was about dignity and protection. I took the envelope and walked to the bank that same afternoon. I sat down with a financial advisor and made the transfer official, $120,000 into a new account under my name. I wasn't planning to spend it all at once, but I did finally pay the deposit on my apartment, enroll in a full session of art classes, and buy a set of real brushes and canvas, not just motel sketch pads and motel pens. I even made a small donation to the library where I worked, anonymous. But the joy it gave me wasn't anonymous at all. I was no longer just surviving. I was curating a life that was mine. And that was the real justice. Not just taking the fund, not just living without Marley's permission, but knowing that the legacy I had built, the loyalty I had poured out for decades, was now being poured into me. A week later, I received another letter, this one from Marley. It wasn't angry, it wasn't manipulative. It was short, handwritten in slightly crooked script. Mom, I heard from your lawyer. I understand now, and I don't blame you. I don't deserve the money, not after how I treated you. But I hope one day I can earn something better. Your trust again. Love. Marley. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the same folder where I kept Frank's. She was right. She didn't deserve the money. But she was finally beginning to understand the bigger picture. This wasn't about money. It was about respect. About love that didn't demand silence in return. About seeing me as more than a backup plan. I didn't write back. Not yet. I needed more time. But for the first time in a long time, I believed we might someday rebuild, not on guilt or obligation, but on truth. In the meantime, I kept painting. One afternoon, I finished a piece that had taken me weeks, a woman standing alone in a field, arms open, eyes closed, wind in her hair. I framed it and hung it above the little table in my new apartment. Beneath it, I wrote a single phrase on a card and tucked it into the frame. She chose herself, and that was enough. Because it was. Because I was. And the final justice wasn't in what I kept. It was in what I finally let go of. It was a rainy Saturday when I saw her again. The knock came just after noon. Software, hesitant. Not the kind of knock you make when you're sure you're welcome, but the kind you use when you aren't sure what you'll find on the other side. I was in my new apartment. Still small, still a bit bare, but filled with light and warmth that no one else could take from me. My painting hung proudly over the kitchen table. The kettle was just starting to hum. I stood in the hallway for a moment, unsure if I even wanted to answer. It had been over a month since Marley's letter arrived. I hadn't replied, I hadn't needed to. Her words had been a beginning, not a bridge, and I wasn't rushing to cross anything just yet. Another knock. Then silence. I opened the door slowly. There she was, Marley, my daughter. Her coat was soaked at the shoulders, her hair clinging to her cheekbones. She looked thinner, tired, worn, but more real than I'd seen her in years. No makeup, no performance, just Marley. She opened her mouth but didn't speak. Her eyes darted behind me, scanning the apartment, not judging, just taking it in. "I didn't know if I should come," she finally said. I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. "I got a job," she added quickly. "A second one, actually. I'm helping out at a retirement home on weekends." I raised an eyebrow. That one surprised me. She shifted her weight. "It's been eye-opening. Listening to those women, the things they've done, what they gave up, what they regret." Still, I said nothing. I wasn't cold, but I wasn't rushing to soften the edges either. That version of me, eager, forgiving, overly generous, no longer lived here. "I don't expect anything," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "I just wanted to say, thank you." "For what?" "For not giving me the money," she said. "For walking away. For why you showing me what it looks like when someone decides to stop settling." That was the first time I felt my breath hitch. She continued, "You didn't scream. You didn't shame me. You just left. And it haunted me, Mom. It still does. Because your absence said more than anything you ever shouted." She looked down at her shoes. "I miss you, but I also understand if you need more time, or even if you don't want me in your life the same way." I looked at her for a long time, and for a moment, the years peeled back. She wasn't the cruel woman from the living room anymore. She was the girl who once brought me flowers for Mother's Day with a hand-drawn card. She was the girl who cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak. She was the girl I raised. But she wasn't mine anymore. She was her own, and so was I. I stepped back just slightly, not to invite her in, but to show I wasn't closing the door. Not yet. "Do you want tea?" I asked. She looked stunned, then nodded. "Sure, if you have time." "I do," I said, "but not forever." She followed me into the apartment quietly. I poured her a cup, handed it over without sugar. She didn't ask for any. We sat across from each other, the painting watching from the wall like a witness to our new chapter. We didn't talk about the fund. We didn't talk about the motel or the note I'd left or the years of bruises neither of us could see. We talked about books, about art, about the old neighbor who used to overwater her petunias. We talked like two people trying to figure out if there was anything left to rebuild. And there was. Not much, not the whole house. But maybe a room. After an hour, she stood to leave. "Can I come back sometime?" she asked. I didn't promise anything, but I said, "We'll see." She nodded. She didn't push. As the door closed behind her, I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just stood there, holding an empty teacup, knowing I had taken one more step not toward her, but toward me. The apartment is quiet now. Not empty. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't sting, but settles around me like a warm blanket on a crisp morning. There's no door slamming in the next room, no sighs of irritation from across the kitchen table, no silent treatment lingering in the air like smoke. It's just me, a kettle whistling softly, and the sound of rain tapping the windows like a gentle reminder. You survived. It's been 6 weeks since Marley visited. She hasn't returned, and I haven't invited her back. But that afternoon with her, that honest, trembling visit was enough for now. It told me she's beginning her journey just like I began mine. I don't know what her path looks like, and I don't need to, because for the first time in years, my life doesn't orbit hers. I sit by the window every morning with my tea, always the same blend, jasmine and green. The mug is chipped, the window slightly drafty, but I feel peace. I feel whole. I journal now every evening before bed, not to keep a record of pain, but to remember joy, to collect evidence of growth. Little things like the way Mrs. Callahan from the library hugged me when her grandson loved the book I picked for him, how my hand doesn't shake when I paint anymore, that I finally bought myself a new pair of boots after years of making do, that I laughed, really laughed, twice this week. I think about Frank often, not with sorrow anymore, but with the kind of gratitude that fills a room. His letter lives in the drawer of my nightstand. I read it less these days, but sometimes I open it just to feel his voice again. He knew me better than I knew myself. And when he wrote, "Don't forget her," he wasn't warning me about Marley. He was reminding me not to lose Janessa. And I did lose her. For a while. In motherhood. In grief. In trying too hard to be everything to someone who eventually saw me as nothing. But I found her again. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. I found her in brushstrokes, in library aisles, in afternoon walks with no destination, in boundaries I never thought I had the right to set. I used to believe that being a mother meant giving until there was nothing left, that the more I sacrificed, the more I'd be loved, that shrinking myself for my daughter's comfort was an act of loyalty. But I've learned something else now. Being a mother doesn't mean disappearing. It doesn't mean becoming invisible so someone else can shine. It means showing up with love, yes, but also with truth, with strength, with limits. Marley may come back. She may not, but either way, I'm not waiting at the door with my hands clasped, hoping she remembers I exist. If she returns, she'll meet someone new, someone whole, someone who will love her deeply, but never at the cost of herself. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not a fund, not a folded note on a counter, but this quiet, steady life. This proof that a woman can rebuild, not from ashes, but from the parts of herself she was told were too much, too loud, too demanding, too inconvenient. Today, I finished a painting I've been working on for weeks. It's not complicated, just a woman standing in a garden, sunlight pouring through the leaves. Her hands are dirty with soil, her eyes closed, her mouth just barely curved into a smile. She's not waiting for anyone. She's not mourning anything. She's just growing. I signed my name in the corner, Janessa Whitlow, and hung it in my living room beside the first piece I ever did at Blue Table Studio. 2 versions of me side by side, one broken open, one blooming. The storm has passed. I'm still here, and I'm not a burden. I never was.